You don't win your case at trial. You win your case during trial preparation. Hello and welcome to the Gartlan Injury Law Trials podcast from the Evergreen Creative Studios in historic downtown Dothan. I'm Aaron Gartlan of Gartlan Injury Law, and we're excited to start this program today. It's going to be a program that will help you add value to your case, explain how to deal with some of the challenges in personal injury cases. This designed to help you maximize the recovery in your case. And that's what we want to talk about here today. I'm here with Candice Hemenes, who is our client advocate and actually serves as the Director of Client Services. Candice, would you talk with us a little bit about your background and what drew you into law? You know, we've worked together for over 10 years now, so there's been a lot of clients, a lot of cases, a lot of things I know that have impacted both of us. What drew you into law? What got you?
Well, it was actually a tragedy that drew me into law. In 2009, my dad was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and he was in the first stages of it, receiving treatment at a major hospital. I won't name the hospital, but it was supposed to be a fairly easy surgery. He was cleared for surgery. Everything was going good. The day before surgery, they had said that he probably needed to have a stent put in. That is what the cardiologist said. The doctor said, no, we think we can move forward with the surgery. He doesn't need the stent. It's a small blockage. We'll go ahead and follow through with the surgery, and he can get the stent later on. Probably 10 minutes into surgery, he coded, and it was because of his heart. He went into cardiac arrest. Well, the doctor again overrode it and said, we're going to go ahead and go through with the surgery and finish the surgery. So even though, we questioned him, should we stop it? Should we get the heart problem fixed and come back? Well, he didn't. Okay, so he made it through the surgery, and I guess his heart was just still too weak. He probably shouldn't have underwent a surgery like that. And he went to a major cardiac arrest and passed away 5 days later in the hospital. So, I questioned the doctor. The doctor seemed, really remorseful. He was my dad was the first and only patient he had ever lost. I mean, he was a really, really good doctor. We took a lot of time researching to find him. And so I contacted a lawyer, and I did not realize, how helpless you are, how helpless people feel with things like that, having to get the records, deal with the grieving process, not really understand it. And our medical malpractice laws here are so geared toward protecting the physicians that, the families don't have a chance, and they don't know where to go, and they don't know who to turn to. And even though I wasn't successful on doing anything, I've learned so much since then, and I remember feeling that helplessness, and I want to help other people that's going through. And I've seen so many and been able to help so many, and it doesn't heal you, but it kind of fills that void, of being able to help and take your experiences to someone else and, be with their families during their hard times.
But also in work injuries, oftentimes families after a death, they're not necessarily thinking about lawyers and lawsuits. They just oftentimes want to know what happened.
Yeah, they want to know what happened, and, if it's the sole provider for the household, they're struggling, there's no income, their lives are upside down, so they need somebody to guide them. And, what is the next step? Because they're not thinking clearly, and they need somebody that's got their best interest at heart, that's going to get in there, going to find out what happened and get them answers and get them compensation.
You have basically been an advocate for our clients. I would ask you to talk with us about what that means for you.
From the intake till the moment, they get their settlement check and walk out the door, they're dealing with me at almost a every day or every other day basis. There's a lot of the people that we get coming through that don't have medical insurance, and we've got a good relationship with the doctors here that we can get them in and get them medical treatment, because first and foremost, we want them feeling the way they did before the injury. And that's the most important thing. The compensation is just secondary. And people without health insurance or no means or no financial means to be able to see a doctor, they depend on us to help them and answer these questions and get them to where they need to go. So, that's probably the first step in the case, is making sure that they're getting all of the treatment that they need, and everything else is secondary. And then we come in and we, get all of their medical records, guide them if more treatment is needed. And then we try to work with the insurance companies or the responsible parties on working out a settlement based on the facts and circumstances surrounding their case.
What are the big challenges that you've seen over the years?
I think the biggest challenge is everything wants it to happen tomorrow. People are in a hurry. They need the money. They want everything done so quickly. And in the injury cases, we can't really do anything until they're completely healed and until we know their final prognosis. And another thing, I think, the age of social media, these people, a lot of people come in with these really, really high expectations. They see it on TV or they see the ads online that I'm not going to say they're not truthful, but I will say that it's exaggerated. And some of the scenarios that they show on TV are not, that's not exactly how it happened and why, this person received $2 million. So, I think just controlling their expectations and getting the best outcome while being able to get them back to the way they were before the injury is probably the hardest part.
The lawyer ads, and I think have made us the butt of a lot of jokes that I'm sure we deserve, but one commercial that stands out in particular is that shows that I can remember is a lady receiving a $900,000 check, but what it doesn't say, and what it doesn't, and is as if it's some kind of celebration, but what it doesn't show is that this woman was confined to a wheelchair the rest of her life.
Right.
So even though this commercial is depicting a $900,000 settlement, it's also not explaining that to get there, she's going to be in a wheelchair the rest of her life. And oftentimes those cases take years of litigation to get there.
Right. Sort of like the McDonald's hot coffee case. A lot of people have a different perception of that case than it really was. This lady was severely injured. It wasn't that she spilled a little coffee on her lap and got a big fat check. I mean, she was really injured. And I know you can talk a little more on exactly what her injuries were.
She was hospitalized and almost died. And and initially was just asking for some medical bills to be paid, and to get to the the judgment. It went through a jury trial, an appeal process, several years of litigation. It wasn't just a cup of hot coffee. And kind of the driver for the jury was that the McDonald's, their safety, their quality control had recommended multiple times that they cut the temperature down on the coffee to avoid these severe burns, that it would still keep it fresh. It would still keep it, good coffee. It just wouldn't be at a temperature that would cause a severe burn. And so that was the driver, but it took several years of litigation to get there. And through that appeal process, the verdict got significantly cut. So it just, the stories that went around were not even close to being accurate. For you and for people in our community that are dealing, whether it's a work injury, a medical injury, an automobile wreck. What are the challenges beyond just the expectations, the length of time? What are some of the specific things that you see people dealing with?
With the economy and everything the way it is, everybody in life in general has their own issues. So a wreck that may not be the biggest deal in the world becomes a huge obstacle for people that are already hurting or having issues at home. And, I'm not going to say that we have to play therapists sometimes, but those people just want somebody to hear them. They want somebody to hear them, tell them it's going to be okay. Even if it's nothing to do with the case, I find out if you just listen to people and empathize with them and understand them, sometimes that's all that they need to turn their minds around. They could be having a bad day, call you, be angry about something. I mean, it happens all the time. And a lot of time it's nothing to do with you. It's to do with something they're going through, and the wreck or the injuries just added more on top of that. So sometimes they just need a listening ear. So I just always have to make sure that I put myself in their shoes, because I have been in their shoes before. And just be understanding and realize at the end of the day, they matter most, their interests matter most, and not the outcome of the case, but really their experience in doing the very best we can do for them.
I remember the great trial lawyer Bob Prince used to tell us, you have to love your clients. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I found, I think the first thing is kind of a combination of things they want to know. They want to know, can you help me? Do you care about me? And if so, why you? And so I'd like for you to kind of touch on that a little bit. Like when people are contacting us, what are the answers to those questions? Do I even need an attorney? And kind of along with that, are you going to get all the money?
Right.
Would you agree with that assessment there, that those are kind of the basic questions that are swirling around?
It is, and really each case is different, and you know this too. No two cases are alike. So it's important for them to have the patience to kind of explain everything to us. And I know it seems redundant. We ask them a lot of the same questions, but in this day and age, people want answers now, and that's why we get the inquiries online where they talk to the AI or the reps online, because they would like to have an answer there, then and there, and want to know the value of the case. And there's just so much that goes into that. I mean, with the first phone call, we're not able to tell them a case value. And, we have to let them know, we have to see what your medical treatment is. But the most important thing is that you get medical treatment, that you get back to feeling the way, that you did before the accident. Or injury. So I think there's really a lot that goes into it, and a lot that goes into the value of the case, but it just kind of takes patience. And I think getting them to have that patience depends upon how you treat them from the beginning, and just kind of being there for them. And, although a lot of the information we give them is overwhelming, they do understand it if you just take your time with them and explain, to them the entire process.
And something else that I've seen, again, starting back in 1997 to now, there's periods where it seems that more cases are resolved through settlement. Mm-hmm. And then there's periods where we're filing more lawsuits and more cases are going into litigation. And I think I would say over the last year, we've seen cases that would historically settle outside of litigation going into litigation. Now, I'm going to bring up another wonderful trial lawyer that we had the opportunity to work with, Randy Smith. Mm-hmm. And Randy always told us that you don't win your case at trial, you win your case during trial preparation. That kind of touches on from our perspective, what we do day in and day out to add value to help people maximize the recovery is, that trial preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that, and then anything that you could, remember, like with Randy?
Randy Smith was old school. He didn't even have a computer in his office, but he was one of the best trial lawyers that was. He never sugar-coated anything. So I think we made a good team with him because he was kind of come in like a bear, a little harsh, and we were kind of on the other side where we could soften things up for the clients. But Randy knew law like most people, know their nightly prayer. There was not much he didn't know about injury or law. And as you said, it's always better for the client if we can get it settled out of court. But sometimes, and I believe some of these insurance companies do it for a write-off. I don't know if they have to have so many. They're going to try to see what the statistics are versus settlement versus judgment. But the main thing is, getting the medical records, doing doctor's depositions, and along the way, just keep your client's expectations on par with what you actually think it's going to be. If not, sometimes the whole train can just go off the rails, and that's a really, really big issue, is just keeping people's expectations where they need to be. And a lot of times we can't tell in the beginning, but when we're getting up to trial, we pretty much got an idea in our head of what, we're going to get or going to ask for. And you need to have them ready for that and prepared for that. And I think the good thing, trial, sometimes, what is it taking 2 or 3 years, sometimes longer now?
Yes.
We have time to work with them along the way. And also, a good thing about it going to trial is that they can get additional medical treatment in the meantime. Or for those who haven't been able to get as much medical treatment as necessary, we have time to do that. We have time to build our case and, get the best possible outcome for the client.
Well, Cass, let me elaborate on a few things that you've touched on there. So the litigation, the driver in litigation, there's some cases, as you know, that we know from the very beginning, to get the full value of this case, to maximize the recovery, it needs to go into litigation. And oftentimes those are cases where there's a automobile wreck with catastrophic injuries involving a commercial vehicle.
Right.
Oftentimes those cases, work injury cases that are outside of workers' compensation, where there's maybe a defective product or maybe a third party outside of an employer that's responsible for causing catastrophic injuries. Mm-hmm. And so again, cases involving serious injuries now.
Or death.
Yes. And kind of the driver in cases outside of that are going to resolve outside of litigation, the driver in all those cases is adding value, maximizing the recovery. And in a case that goes outside of litigation, that settles or resolves outside of litigation, the thing that we have to evaluate the driver is the damages and the responsible party's conduct and for causing the injuries, and the responsible party's ability to pay a verdict or judgment. That holds true in litigation also. But in a case that settles outside of litigation, the thing that we're evaluating is, could we do better in litigation? Would filing a lawsuit and working to get that case in front of a jury, would that ultimately provide more compensation? But to get there, the damages have to be proven. The insurance company or the responsible party is not just going to take our word for it. We have to prove damages. How does that work? How do we go about proving injuries and damages in Alabama? And I think, and I'm sorry to interrupt there, I know, but that's part of what takes the time. That's
right.
Part of what takes the time. How do we evaluate damages, and if the case did go to court, if the case did go into litigation, how do we prove damages? And if it doesn't go into litigation, we're still having to set it up as if it's going in that direction.
Litigation.
So how does that work? How do we prove damages in Alabama?
Well, our first clear look at any damages, of course, is going to be the medical records. But to go a little further than that, when a case goes into litigation and we're setting it up for litigation, we've got to have expert medical testimony. I know you and I the other day, we've got some pretty good damages in a case, but we called the doctor, and still, even though it was pretty clear what he was saying, we had to make sure that he was going to testify that. So
yes,
and make sure that his deposition, he's going to support those records. And just because I know that we have both seen where records can say one thing, and then you get a doctor, an expert under oath, and something else is said. So they have to go hand in hand. The records alone are not going to help, but when you've got the expert testimony, the medical doctors, good liability, especially if there's negligent circumstances that caused the accident, you're in pretty good shape. And a lot of times those cases will never see a courtroom because they're going to settle out before trial or in mediation.
We prove the injuries in an injury case through medical evidence,
right.
Medical records, and then if it goes into trial, doctor's testimony, typically the treating doctor or treating doctor's testimony, and they have to relate the injury to the accident, whether it's a work injury, whether it's an automobile wreck. What you're saying is the doctor has to get under oath and say to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that automobile wreck, that work injury, yes, prompted this medical treatment, prompted this surgery, and it's either the cause of it or it aggravated an existing condition. So isn't that kind of another challenge that our clients face if they have a medical history or an ongoing medical treatment or past injuries, past treatment? Would you kind of explain how that ties into damages?
Yes, because during the discovery process, and I've never seen it not being asked in the interrogatories or request for production, is provide the last 5 years of medical records. And then once they get those, if they see that there's something else, they may have you go back even further. So that always comes into play, and it's really important that our clients are upfront, because I know a lot of times we've asked, have you had any more injuries? Have you had a surgery? And sometimes they'll tell us no, or they don't really remember, something that's happened. And then during the discovery process, we find that out. So it is really difficult. And, some of the injuries that we could look at in the medical records and we'll say, hey, this is related. This is pretty clear. And then you talk with the doctor. Well, they kind of waffle back and forth. Well, we're not sure, but maybe it aggravated. And I think a lot of times that's what we get unless there's a real traumatic injury. I think a lot of times we get aggravation of pre-existing conditions, which is bad. It doesn't mean the client's no less injured. It just means that we can't attribute the full injury to what happened.
Yes. And to give you some context around it, a couple of examples of cases that we've recently settled. I know one in particular, this wonderful, nice lady was airlifted and had to go in for an emergency surgery directly from the wreck scene. Airlifted to the hospital, they bring her back to do an emergency surgery. That's clear cut, it's related to the wreck.
Right.
Another case, literally, our client is in an automobile wreck, and he's literally on his way. He's in a wreck. It's not his fault, but he's literally on his way to see a neurosurgeon.
Right.
And so that case was an aggravation. He had ongoing issues with his neck and his spine and was actually going in for a surgical consultation. And then how many clients have we had over the years that have had neck and back surgery and they're healing up, going through therapy, and they're in a rear end collision while going through that. And typically those are cases where we're proven that the wreck or the work injury aggravated an existing condition. But what people often don't realize, in Alabama, without that medical testimony, if that case goes into litigation without that medical testimony that the injury, it was either caused by or aggravated by, you don't even get to discuss it.
Right.
Now maybe your client can talk about, or they can talk about having stiffness, soreness, pain, but to get to the true damage award for that, we've got to have, and if the doctor says, I can't say to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that it was caused by or aggravated by, we don't even really get to talk about it, maybe other than saying, hey, I had some stiffness and soreness and that kind of thing. So I think these are the challenges that people face. And another one that we see, and you touched on it, with so many people not having medical insurance coverage, is, and a lot of guys, and it's men and women, but we see so many guys over the years that have been in this category, they just want to get back to work.
Right.
Like there's a picture that's painted that an injury client or an injury case is somebody working a system, but wouldn't you say historically our clients just want to get back?
They want to get back to work. They want to, it's really an aggravation to them. I can't, and that's another thing. Injury lawyers get a bad rep. Oh, it's all about the money. They're ambulance chasers. No, these are real families going through hardships, that's lost their income, that are just trying to find a way to pay their light bill, all because, somebody else caused their injury. So it's a lot different. And like I said, social media plays a big role in that, exaggerating. But most of our clients, you have to kind of tell them, hey, are you feeling okay? Probably need to get some medical treatment, because they just want life to get back to normal again.
And so oftentimes that can create, haven't you seen, gaps in medical treatment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
where there's a time
they can afford
yes
to miss work, or they don't have any PTO or anything like that. So yeah, it really does, and then that hurts the case as well when there's a gap, or there's, a time period right after the injury until they get medical treatment. All those factors go into play.
And isn't that essentially for every day that goes by that they're not being evaluated by a doctor, or their injuries are going undiagnosed, untreated? Every day that goes by, doesn't that raise the possibility that, hey, you couldn't have been hurt that bad. It couldn't have caused or aggravated couldn't have caused an injury or aggravated an injury. Otherwise, you would have gone in right away.
Yes, they're heavily scrutinized. The longer the time from the incident till they get medical treatment, or if they've been recommended continuing medical treatment and there's gaps in it, that just gives the at-fault party a reason to say, okay, well, they wasn't hurt, or we're going to have to look a little closer into these injuries, because if they've got gaps in treatment, they couldn't have been hurt that bad. So there's a lot of problems arise from that. So,
well, and I think about a few cases where that's prevalent in. I know years ago, and this goes back to, again, an opportunity to work a case with Bob Prince and his law firm. But I remember we had a client in the office that had been in a head-on, really violent head-on collision, and he'd been to the emergency room a couple of times, and in talking with him, something just seemed off. So once he left the office, I called his dad and just asked, hey, I don't want to be offensive, but is he always this way? And he said, no, Aaron, something's off from this wreck. So we helped facilitate getting him in to see a psychiatrist. And it turns out that he had one of the worst he was suffering with one of the worst traumatic brain injuries that this doctor, the case had to go into litigation. The doctor came in and gave a deposition that this was one of the worst, traumatic brain injuries that he'd ever seen. And it was definitely traumatic brain injury caused in this head-on collision. And again, this guy had been to the emergency room twice. So talk with us about the issues and challenges that the emergency room kind of where people's, some of the misconceptions about, treatment in the emergency room. And
well, the emergency room, our emergency medical doctors and nurses, they do a wonderful job at high-stress trauma situations, but they're just going to get you in there and address the chief complaints. They're going to address them if there's any blood loss, oxygen problems, any levels that you need medication, to repair. But things as far as doing MRIs, CTs, things that they're going to tell you to follow up with a specialist. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people, they want to get back to work, like you said, and they don't follow up. But it's important that they do, because if 7 months down the road after your case, if you're still having problems and, you've already settled the case because you won't get any more further medical treatment and the case settles, and then you have to have a surgery, they're not responsible anymore because the case is settled. So it's important that everything's attributed and you get thorough medical treatment. Again, for emergency situations, they'll get you fixed up out the door, but you do need to follow up with a specialist, your own primary care physician.
Yes, and some clients we've seen, where they come in months after, weeks after, months after the wreck, oftentimes they're using that emergency room as a follow-up.
Care physician, and it's so expensive. And we see this a lot with people that don't have health insurance, because the emergency room will take them and bill them later, versus if you go into a primary care doctor without health insurance, they're going to want the money up front. So yes, we see this. And unfortunately, in Alabama automobile wreck cases, the minimal limits is $25,000, and 2 emergency room visits, if that's what someone has, can eat up the bill, really eat up the settlement really quick. So, that's where we come in, trying to get them to the right doctor that's not only going to do the best for them, but also going to work with them until settlement, and reduce and kind of work with us to make sure they get the best possible treatment.
I think about a really nice lady that wound up having a neck surgery, and that was kind of the chief complaint for about 6 months to a year after the wreck, and everybody was focused on the neck. And so she had her neck surgery, and then the family started noticing that there was some memory loss. Mm-hmm. And there was a dispute between 2 of her treating doctors. One doctor said, hey, the memory loss is traumatic, related to traumatic brain injury. The other doctor said, no, this is just the onset of dementia. Mm-hmm. Again, wouldn't you say just being able to evaluate what all of the injuries, all of the damages are? I think about another lady that kind of highlights how over the years you've helped encourage people to avoid significant gaps in treatment. I remember a lady, and this is, again, one of the cases that we had the opportunity to work with Randy. She had taken relatively relatively speaking, the vehicle damage, the impact was not one of the biggest, it was relatively minimal. But I know this is a common injury that you see in automobile wrecks. She was complaining about some issues with her shoulder.
Right.
But reluctant to go because her medical coverage hadn't started. But anyway, you wound up encouraging her, and it turned out that she had that
torn rotator cuff. Yeah, a lot of times in those even low impact accidents, especially if people are being rear-ended and they can see the vehicle coming, they'll grip their steering wheel. And when they do, and that impact hits, they're gripping so hard it can tear the shoulder area. So we do see that a lot. That is a common injury. So you can't always look at the vehicle and say, well, there's no way they got that injury. But the doctors have been really good over the last few years of relating that type of injury to these low impact vehicle wrecks. So that's why with any cases, it's best to go follow up and just make sure that you're okay, that there's nothing that you're feeling that you wasn't feeling before.
Candice, we've been discussing some challenges that people face in an injury or death case, and kind of the challenges that we face, and how easy sometimes social media makes it all look nice and neat and pretty.
Yeah.
And I often say they make it look like you're just ordering a pizza. Just give me what I want and leave off the stuff that I don't want. But the basics of any injury or death case, we've got to establish liability. We've got to show that, and there's some exceptions, and we'll do a program about workers' compensation cases. But what I'm talking about are your injury and death cases. We have to establish liability. We have to establish fault. We've also been discussing some things that drive value. And so in establishing that liability, the conduct of the parties, is it negligent conduct? Is it reckless conduct? Is it intentional conduct?
Right.
And I promise there's some questions here. I just want to lay this foundation. What people often don't understand, if it's intentional conduct, that may be a criminal act that's not covered by insurance. So oftentimes we're looking to establish reckless or negligent conduct. And a quick example of that, an automobile wreck that involves a drunk driver that caused the wreck. If there's an ability to pay a judgment, that drunk driver case, all things being equal, is going to be more valuable because the conduct's so egregious. You're getting into that reckless conduct, but my point is, we have to establish the conduct. We have to show the liability. We have to show that somebody did something wrong. We see this so often in premise liability cases, and I think this highlights, like the medical cases, really highlights the challenges that the injured face in the judicial system and in the insurance process. Is what you say in the medical cases and the premise liability cases, the responsible conduct is so hard to prove.
Yes.
And what are some of the challenges in the premise cases to kind of highlight how we have to show essentially somebody did something wrong?
Right. And a lot of things with the premise liability case that the venue we are in, the cases in this area are going to be a whole different ball game from the cases in, say, New Orleans. They have a more liberal venue. We have a conservative venue. So the settlements are not going to be, and just the juries, the jury pool that's sometimes pulled, a lot of times they're not plaintiff friendly. But as far as challenges with the premise cases, everything's reported now. So they have videos. They're going to scrutinize what the client was wearing, what the weather was like. Were they on their phone? What were they doing, at the time? So they're going to do everything they can to put the blame back on the client and not accept any responsibility for it.
So the blame on the client, let's put that aside and we'll talk about that, because I think, again, that shows some of the pitfalls and challenges that the injured face. Oftentimes people contact us after they've fallen in a retail store, a grocery, whether it's a grocery store or whatever the case might be. And wouldn't you say the assumption is, hey, I was injured here. I fell and I was injured in their store. Their response.
Right.
Does it work that way?
No, it absolutely does not. There's a lot of.
How do we establish their response?
We have to show that they did something wrong, that there was conditions that they knew about. Just something being in the floor, just say of a retail venue, just something being in the floor is not enough. Did our client see it? Was it big enough to see? You have to know a lot about that. Did the store owners have time to get it up? We've had some cases where there's been liquid in the floor, and they go back to see how long the liquid was spilled. Did they have notice of it? How long was the notice? So it's really difficult to prove that they did, at times to prove they did something wrong, even though it's glaring. To be able to prove that in litigation is a whole different story.
So let's touch on a couple of examples, I think, that'll remind you of some cases that we've handled. If you recall, we had a case in a grocery store where there was a wet floor sign propped up, not in the aisle, but over onto the wall. And our client, who, and again, this shows some of the pitfalls, who was wearing flip-flops.
Yes.
And had been diagnosed with chronic arthritis in the knees, and was recommended for knee surgery. And also, as oftentimes happens with patients that are recommended for knee replacement,
right.
Clients that are recommended for that are often recommended to lose weight also prior to the surgery, or kind of in that process, slipped and fell and suffered a fractured femur in the, and I think this kind of highlights several things. There's a wet floor sign propped up against the wall, but what we found out was the culprit of the water or the liquid was a freezer that had been prone to leak, and it was kind of an ongoing thing. And that sign had just been propped up there at all times. So we were able to establish the culprit, the fact that they knew about it, and the warning really wasn't sufficient. But over kind of in the things that they were pointing out, well, you can't claim the knee replacement because that was the result of chronic
obesity
and arthritis.
Right.
But they also pointed out the flip-flops, and that it was a store that she was familiar with, that she would have known. But ultimately we were able to, but kind of all that swirling around kind of led to the evaluation of, hey, could we do better in court? They have that duty to be aware of the surroundings, to look, but in another case that happened at a mall in Birmingham, we were able to go back and look at the video, and there was a liquid. Our client fell and had to have a surgery after the fall. And so the injury was clearly related to the fall, but it boiled down to the liquid on the floor, how long it had been there, and when the when the store was made aware of the liquid in kind of the entrance way, and it was a short amount of time, once we all reviewed the video, was it a minute? Had it been there for like 1 minute?
Not even quite a minute, I don't think.
Like
maybe a minute and a few seconds, but not long.
Yeah. So if that case a jury would have had to decide, should they have done something within 1 minute?
Right.
Because the law says they have to have adequate notice of it to have time to take steps to rectify it or to clean it up. It's not just that she fell and had to have surgery. We had to literally file the lawsuit, and in that litigation process, we were able to determine, when they knew about it or should have known about it, and how long did it take them to clean it up. And so all that factors in. The other thing that, wouldn't you say, that we see so often in automobile wrecks is the defenses that insurance companies are able to raise, or that defendants are able to raise, the contributory negligence and assumption of the risk. Could you talk with us about how the primarily we see contributory negligence?
Yes.
And how that plays out, and specifically, wouldn't you say we see that so often in automobile wreck cases?
Yes. With the contributory negligence law in Alabama, all the other party has to show is that either party was 1% at fault. And it is so easy to show that, 1% fault. Like, it could be that the other party, maybe they did T-bone your client, that maybe your client was speeding. So if they can prove that, and a lot of times they're not successful, but they still have that. It seems like more lately than ever, they've been claiming that defense. Usually we're able to get them settled out, but that's always a defense they run to. What would you say? Probably about 50% of the time they're going to try that in the beginning to see if, hey.
Yeah, in other states such as Florida, they recognize comparative negligence. So there's an apportionment of fault, and maybe your reward would be discounted by your share of the responsibility. But what people often don't realize in Alabama, we have to show that the defendant is 100% at fault.
Yes.
And if you're 1%, in fact, if the case goes to trial and contributory negligence is a defense in the case, the jury's instructed, if you find that the plaintiff or the injured is even 1% to blame, and essentially we have to show that the defendant or the person that caused the injury and is 100%, and that our client could not have done anything to avoid it.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, that's a really high threshold. That's a really high. So that can definitely create a challenge. And the next thing, I think the kind of the where we'll land and end here is that challenge of the responsible party having the ability to pay a judgment.
Right.
And typically that's going to be through insurance coverage. And I touched earlier on the commercial cases. And if you recall, the really nice, hardworking lady that had the shoulder surgery, there's a little bit of gap in treatment. You kind of helped guide her through getting to a specialist, getting, the diagnosis. She ultimately had surgery. But if you remember from that case, we were able to look at, through our investigation of how the wreck happened, it turned out that a delivery driver for a national restaurant chain caused the wreck, caused her injury. And if you remember, there was a dispute around the delivery chain had software that showed that, according to their records, he was not on the clock. It was not anything work related, making a delivery. However, we had a witness that said that he actually said that he was on his way
and had pizzas in the car.
Yes. Yes. And so if you remember, we were able to get the policy limits from the delivery driver, his insurance policy limits. We were able to utilize our clients' uninsured, underinsured. So this is kind of setting up the last part, some of that coverage. But also we were able to hold the delivery company, the national restaurant chain responsible. And so that significantly impacted the amount of compensation that she received. But what do we see so often? And again, specifically in automobile wreck cases, the challenges that are there.
Yeah, most of the time, and I think this last quarter of the year we have saw it a lot, but we see people with no insurance at all. And then if there's no insurance, if you have what is called underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage, you can pursue a claim through that coverage. But the problem is a lot of people don't have that. They don't even realize when they're picking a policy that they sign to reject that coverage. They see it, and I want to say it's probably what, $8 to $10 a month more. It's not much, but it can be invaluable down the road. So,
Yes.
But we've seen about 3 wrecks lately.
Yes.
But there's been no coverage on either end, and pretty significant injuries that there's going to be nothing they can do now. If they've got full coverage, of course, that's going to cover their vehicle. But if there's injuries, unless you're going to go after the person that hit you and didn't have insurance, thinking that, you could they're probably judgment proof anyways. So I think everybody needs to look at their policies and talk with their agent and make sure that they have the proper coverage in place, because we're seeing it more and more, and it could really come in handy if you're injured.
Yeah. Candice, you're 100% correct. We're seeing more hit and run type cases. People are driving faster, more distracted now than ever. There's more people. The traffic count is on the road is higher than it's ever been. And what we're seeing is either people causing automobile wrecks and they flee the scene, or they have no insurance coverage, or if they do have insurance coverage, they've got the state minimum, which you touched on in Alabama is $25,000. Well, along with these conditions that are creating those kind of automobile wrecks, we're also seeing emergency room bills and life flight bills of $50,000 and $100,000. So the uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage will protect you and your family if you're in a wreck caused by someone with minimum policy limits and not enough insurance coverage to fully compensate you for your injuries and damages, or if they have no insurance. The other thing, wouldn't you say, that you do along with that, which just brings us back to have an insurance audit, and we would be glad to talk with you about your coverages, review your policy with you. But along with the uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, the med pay. I mean, even if you have medical insurance for the life flight bills and the things that can come into play in these catastrophic injury cases, it can really protect you and your family. And so we would encourage you, as you're going through this holiday season, getting into the end of the year, starting out the new year, make sure you do an insurance audit with your agent, your insurance agent. Actually talk to somebody, go over the coverage that you have, make sure you understand it and you know what you need. But again, we've looked at hundreds, and if I expand out to the lawyers that we work with, the network of lawyers, we work with thousands of insurance policies over the years. So we would be glad to review insurance policy and talk with you about that. Wanted to start the Gartlan Injury Laws Trial podcast to highlight some of the pitfalls and challenges that the injured face in Alabama and really across the country, and how to deal with those challenges. It's a driver for us in cases to make sure that we're bringing value, that we're adding value to our clients and their cases, to ensure that we're maximizing the recovery, that we're ensuring that they get the very best medical treatment, therapy, and care available, and are getting the full value, that they're being fully compensated for the full value of their case. And that's what this program is about, is helping people identify what to do with the challenges that the injured face, to ultimately provide them with the information and the resources to maximize their recovery, to help get the medical care and treatment and therapy they need, and to maximize the recovery and the compensation in their case. We're going to have guests in the future that are resources in the community that can help, and again to just highlight the challenges and how to meet those challenges.
And I think, you don't know what you don't know. And that's a lot of things. And I think, especially with Aaron and his background, my background, we're personable. People were easy to talk to. A lot of people are overwhelmed and they don't want somebody that they don't understand or that's not easy to talk to. So we want them to feel comfortable and know that they've got somebody that's been through it, that can relate to them and is willing to stick by them till the end, no matter what, and to actually hear them. So I think this podcast is important. And it also, there's just a lot of unanswered questions that I think through the series of, the podcast that we're going to answer for them that otherwise they may not know.
Growing up, my dad always said, and I probably heard him say 1,000 times, Aaron, get a good education, because that's something that nobody can take from you. And I really didn't understand what he meant at that point. But, I started working in a law firm in 1997. And through that time, I think about the people that I've had the opportunity, people like Candice that I've had the opportunity to work with and learn from. We mentioned the great Bob Prince that said, you got to love your clients. Aaron, you got to love your clients. Randy Smith, who told us, didn't just tell us, Bob, same thing with Bob. They didn't just tell us, they showed us, you don't win your case at trial, you win your case in trial preparation. We want to bring in some of the wonderful people that we've had the opportunity to work with, and learn from, and that have brought value to us. They've brought value to our clients, our cases. Forrest Taylor, for example. Forrest is probably our relationship with Forrest, I know has helped in hundreds of cases and clients. Forrest is a wonderful trial lawyer, and he has probably taken more depositions than, more doctor depositions, which we talked about earlier, which is the kind of the foundation of proving up injuries, proving up damages. Forrest has so much experience with, again, hundreds, if not thousands of doctors, depositions, and the relationships that he has in the community. An excellent CPA and tax lawyer, Cam Metcalf, that has been a financial resource to our clients over the years. The relationship that we formed with Lee Grisham and his law firm in the medical cases. And Candice, can you think of some others?
Even all the way to the insurance agents that
Yes.
we talk to on a daily basis that we have good relationships with. I know we mentioned earlier about auditing your policy. We're going to get into that farther along in the series, where If people will tune in, they'll be able to look at the policy, and we'll just ask some questions and make sure that they have the right coverage that they need.
So, Candice, we've covered a lot of material today. I believe we've covered a lot of ground, again, with the driver to help the injured add value to their case and understand some of the challenges that they face. You had touched on earlier that each case is different. So if there's something that's keeping you up at night or something that's on your mind related to an injury case, we're more than happy to talk with you about your case, the experience that you're having, what you're going through right now. Oftentimes we can give you an evaluation and come up with a game plan in a 15-minute telephone call. And at a minimum, we're going to be able to give you some guidance and help you understand and be able to explain to you if we would be able to bring value, add value to your case, or again, give you some guidance on how to handle the situation that you're in right now. We would also encourage you, as soon as possible, review your automobile insurance and make sure you have adequate coverage, and specifically medical pay, med pay benefits, uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. You can learn more about us, our wonderful clients and family, at GartlanInjuryLaw.com.